Okay. Let's talk about New Age's some of the New Age movement's ideological predecessors, how it's influenced it in a way that would be described as toxic. Okay, and why it's difficult to support that movement, given some of that toxicity. Um, First of all, although the entirety of the book Secret Doctrine has not been read, so like with any bit about any piece of poo, there might be a corn kernel of truth in it. Or maybe there's just a piece of poo in other ways, kernels of truth. We don't know. The point is the put idea in question. Okay, um, is page 171. So there's a video on YouTube that got seen a couple of months back, and he was asking the question: was Madame Blavatsky racist? And he went, well, okay, let's have a look at her writings, and he looked at the Secret Doctrine to try and form an opinion, and found page 171 or something like that. Said that Pacific Islanders or Melanesians or Austronesians or something like sort of general sort of Pacific sort of area in Australia, sort of Papua New Guinea type, Philippines type area, okay, or something very similar. Those people don't have the divine spark of souls. And that was a white man saying that, so just in case you know, and his response was, that is absolutely 100% racist. That is a horrible thing to say. To say that about to make an ethnic statement like that. If you're going, just for anyone out there, there are still atheists in the world who don't believe in the existence of spirits at all. They're incorrect, as it turns out. Um, However, typically those atheists, when they don't believe in the existence of spirits, typically don't believe in the existence of any spirits. And so they're not turning around and saying that one racial group has a spirit and or a soul and the other one doesn't, or that one's more human than the other. They're not doing that at all. They're just saying they don't exist, which is an entirely different argument. Um, so for Madame Blavatsky to even suggest that in the first place is obviously racist. There's no way to get around that. Um, the other issue as well is that based on some of the sort of historical and cultural contributions, the Thule Society was, according to a Masonic video about um, the persecution of the Masons by Hitler. Okay, some a couple of hundred French Masons or something like that got taken to concentration camps by Hitler or something like that, and they talked about the ideological contribution of some Masons in France and Germany before World War Two, and the ideas that and it was produced actually by a Masonic group, so it was really it wasn't actually produced by a competing group. It was actually produced by them. So this makes this very interesting. Um, Apparently, some Masons in that area had contributed to the creation of the Thule Society, or THULE Society, which is associated with not the Divine Order of Kings. That's a completely different idea. Associated with they talk about something called Hyperborea and Lemuria and Atlantis and stuff like that. So there's this idea of this mythical continent where all the white people came from, and it's the source of all the wisdom, yada yada yada, blah blah blah. And they were hypothesizing where it came from. The assumption behind that is of course white supremacy. So to say that any ethnic group is intellectually or morally superior in any way is an example of ethnocentrism or prejudice. And so to even look for Hyperborea on those grounds, it means one of the founding premises of the idea is, of course, racial prejudice. So in that particular respect, those particular Masons were guilty of having founding premises in their ideas that were fundamentally racist. What's really interesting, though, is some of the ideas that they got for that was the idea of root races, which they got from Madame Blavatsky. So this idea of root races is a racist notion. it presupposes the idea that um, there's some kind of mythical origin to the races, and that's why they're different. Um, and the creation of the Thule Society expounded on that idea further, and the mythical past of the Nordics, or specifically the Finnish variety and the Teutonic variety, being associated with Teutons being not as great as the Finnish, but better than other groups, type of thing, were expounded as some kind of a myth of white supremacy. That sort of idea has been expanded upon since the 1970s. So in the 1970s, a non-Masonic group and a non-Theosophic group that's associated with the Satanists, well, a branch of Satanism is more accurate, because again, not all the Masons created the Thule Society, and so not all the Satanists created this either. Which was the idea of the alien hierarchy. So there was a presupposition that beings operate in a hierarchy. They got this from Christianity as well as the Vedics. So in the way the Vedics describe asuras versus devas, doesn't appear to be the same as Christian angelology and demonology, or the Judaic and Islamic variants on that. However, the idea is roughly there, that there's some kind of hierarchy, and at the top is the divine creator or whatever else, the big boss character. So with that type of idea, they kind of might have adopted it. To be fair, it's not clear if those satanics got it from the Raelians, actually, because in the night, because there was a lot of not cross fertilization, but more like ideas were going back and forth during the 1960s quite a fair bit, and California in particular was a hotbed for cults. And including parody cults such as Discordianism, the Church of the Subgenius, and whatever else. One of the things that happened around that time was in France. A group called the Raelians was founded, and some of their membership cropped up in California, and other places in the USA. And part of the Raelian religion involves an alien hierarchy. The boss of the world are aliens from outer space, and the boss amongst them is actually a female goddess, or alien goddess, because that makes it sound, less sexist. Perhaps the guy that founded the cult wanted to say that women were the boss in his cult, because it made him appealing to the third wave feminist movement that was emerging at the time, and he thought he could get some punang. He wouldn't have been the first cult leader to do that, and it probably worked, unfortunately. So when the Raelians cropped up in places like California or LA or whatever else, they would have been, and whatever other places, it could have been other states. They might have been talking to some people who later became part of satanic groups, or already part of them, or whatever, or just called themselves that. And so the idea emerged amongst a variant of Satanism at that time, that of the alien hierarchy. And so over the course of time, the New Age movement has adopted that. They've adopted the alien hierarchy in some parts of the New Age movement as being representative of what you've got, the Galactic Federation and the Cabal and stuff like that, which represent different factions of different alien races. And one of the ideas they seem to have come up with is the idea is the root races being different alien factions. So these illusory correlations continue, in more and more toxic fashions. And as a consequence, they seem to have been saying that the aliens that are from outer space, right? It's not even a joke. That are associated with the Finnish and Teutonic root race, okay, are the Nordics. And the Nordics are the good and friendly ones that want to help you. I mean, the tall whites, they sort of have a mixture of ideas. Sometimes they're beneficial and sometimes they're not, okay? And then they go, and then of course, all the other ones are evil somehow. There's like reptilian shapeshifters and insectoid mantis aliens and all kinds of weird shit like that. And part of their sort of Ariosophic neo-Nazi-like attitude seems to be that Jewish people are insectoid mantis aliens. Okay, this is where it gets really confusing, but where did they get that idea from? Because at this point, it needs to be acknowledged that the group in the 1970s, the Australians, didn't say that. And isn't actually the case that it's not actually said. It probably doesn't say that in the secret doctrine either. The Thule Society might not have said that. Oh, wait a second. No, Hitler did. Okay, anyway, he did because he was calling Jews vermin. So that sort of racist type of attitude needs to be addressed, and addressed for what it is, racism, and toxic racism is at that. So if you turn around and you say that people who are from, just so happen to be from the colonial communities that your empire is attacking at the time, so how about the Asia Pacific and Australia in the late 1800s is probably a good example of that. They happen to be the ones without souls or the subhumans or something like that. Then you're engaging in imperial propaganda and racial prejudice to do so. If you just so happen to say that the people from you're targeting a prejudice during the 1940s, just so happened to come from an alien root race that was not even human at all, then of course you're engaging in imperial propaganda and racism, okay? Ariosophy, Theosophy, and whatever else. Okay, so the idea, however, of Neanderthals being associated with Judaism is a conflation that the neo-Nazis created independently of that, though. And here's how they did it. Another cult that cropped up in the USA in the late 1800s was the cult of the Rapture. So Rapturism isn't, strictly speaking, a literal biblical doctrine in the New Testament at all. Rapturism is an idea that came up as a subculture in the USA associated with the evangelicals, or a subgroup of the evangelicals. And the idea of rapture and left behind involves also the imagery shown by evangelicals of mantis-like beings acting as the devil's army to capture the Christians or punish them on earth after the raptures happen. And so that false connection between the mantis as the devil's army and the presumption that they're Jews, okay, is really rooted in the anti-Semitism of European history. And it's rooted in what Hitler did in the 1940s. Okay, the actual rapturous cult didn't say that they were Jews. Okay, the actual rapturous cult didn't say that. Okay, what's happened is there's been a conflation between cults. Okay, and then they've gone and they've assumed that there's a great Jewocracy because they were neo-Nazis. Okay, and then they haven't actually comprehended the history of each cult and how that's contributed to the ideological malfunction. And so when you get to the bottom of it and you say, well, hang on a second, the idea of root races is a lie, because you've got the situation of what science has actually proven in relation to the origins of humanity and the complex ethnic relationships between different groups, you'll probably find that everyone's related if you go back further enough without it being an Adam and Eve story. And so the idea of one race being superior to the other is just that, racism, and to make false correlations between an ethnic group and a variety of alien is also racism. Let's deal with the psychology of a completely non-esoteric way of looking at what they're saying there. What they're saying there in the post-1970s environment is they're saying that they reckon the Europeans were foreign invaders. The Europeans were immigrants to other countries, such as the United States of America. So those tall whites and those Nordics were aliens that came from a different place, okay? Because there is a conflation between the word alien and immigrant as well, in some places. Not so much Australia, but they call it the Illegal Aliens Act in the USA, which is actually referring to migrants, not beings from outer space. And so what they're basically saying there is that they feel some kind of upset that the Europeans invaded the American continent and they're identifying as the aliens. They're identifying as the illegal immigrants. So the New Age movement in some ways is about white people doing some kind of symbolic acknowledgement that they are in fact illegal migrants to Turtle Island. Okay, that they are in fact invaders, but they're trying to process their idea of white supremacy and the idea that they think that the Teutons and the Finnish people or the white people are better than the native people and the blacks and the Jews and whatever else. And so they're trying to maintain their sense of superiority. There's a superiority complex and the imperial superiority complex by saying instead of it being ordained by a biblical god, it's ordained by aliens from outer space. So not only do white people rule Europe and rule the USA, they also rule outer space as well, which is incredibly racist, like you would not believe. It actually makes no sense at all because outer space is freaking outer space to start off with. And so, so the New Age movement is like some of the ideas is a eclecticism of a confused symbolic expression of white people's mixture of distress as being racist invaders and their support of the noblesse oblige that implies. So they typically get confused and they start playing out their medieval European cultural programming by engaging in things like medieval astrology or words like Vesica Pisces or whatever it might be, because they're expressing the cultural symbolism and forms of a bygone era that's dead by continuing the lies that Europe generated about superiority of any races at all or any ethnic groups. So the actual racism and white supremacy of the New Age movement has its origins in Christianity. So the New Age movement expresses that by saying, but no, they're doing Christ consciousness and they're Christians and stuff like, well, actually, you're not, but we can see why you're saying that. Okay, you're expressing the confusion associated with white supremacy as it comes from fucking Europe. Okay, that's what you're doing. Okay, that's what we're actually doing psychologically. So the idea of Jews as men and aliens is obviously a neo-Nazi scumbag fucking lie, and it's probably come about in the 21st century from places like Fortune or something like that. They're bullshitting people because they're fucking confused and stupid. It seems like the cults don't actually understand their own subconsciousness and the way that they're fucking projecting that shit onto other people by not comprehending what they're saying. Okay? Jews aren't fucking mansion aliens, for fuck's sake. There isn't anyone who's a mansion alien. That's obviously bullshit. A mansion alien is a fucking mansion alien. Whatever the fuck that means. Okay? If you consider it an actual astral pest of some kind or some kind of spirit or maybe it's a holographic projection from a spaceship, fine, whatever. But that doesn't mean it's a Jew. It doesn't mean it's a black person. It doesn't mean it's a woman or a man. It's not any of the fucking people. You've just defined it as an alien from outer space. So why the fuck would it be? Okay? So the Americans really need to get to take into consideration that their language between aliens and immigrants doesn't fucking work. Okay, the New Age movement seems to be about the symbolic relationship of white people identifying as the oppressor, but trying to make out like it's a good thing. It's an expression of noblesse oblige. It's associated with the US military because the US military is an example of an organization that installed dictators in other countries while claiming they were overthrowing them. Okay, the crypto-fascism of the United States of America has become very apparent by not being crypto anymore, and they're all a bit butthurt by it. Have a nice day.